Hi, friends. Father Kerry Walters here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church. And this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one with a few words from Thomas Aquinas on dealing with anxiety. And man, do we need these words today, don't we? Because you and I are living in a perfect storm of anxiety producing events. We have labored for the last 7 months under the pandemic of COVID-19. We have witnessed in this nation levels of anger and rage and political incivility, the likes of which I've never seen in my lifetime. We have witnessed economic hardship, joblessness, and decreasing productivity because of the COVID pandemic. And on top of all of these anxiety producing large events, we have to deal as individuals with those personal sorrows and those personal misfortunes that assail each and every one of us throughout our lifetimes. So all of us are experiencing the burden of anxiety these days. And we Americans aren't very good at dealing with anxiety, are we? We try to somehow flush it out of our system by indulging in immediate gratification. We throw ourselves into hedonistic pleasure, or we go on shopping binges. Sometimes we outright deny the anxiety that is lurking within, and sometimes we fall into deep, deep depression because we just don't know how to cope with the anxiety that gives rise to it. So I think that it is worth our while to consider what Thomas Aquinas might have to say about ways to eliminate or at least reduce anxiety. It may seem strange getting that kind of therapeutic advice from a guy like St. Thomas Aquinas because, after all, we don't think of him as handing out psychological therapeutic advice. We think of him as a rather abstract theologian. But in point of fact, Thomas Aquinas had experienced a good deal of anxiety, a good deal of sorrow in his own life. Let me just give you two quick examples. When he was a youngster and declared to his parents that he wanted to join the newly formed Dominican order, they actually locked him into the castle for several months in order to try and dissuade him from this desire. And then when they finally released him and he began to go to school as a Dominican student, he was mocked by fellow students, partly because he was already quite large in girth, but also because he appears to not have talked much during classes, and his muteness made his fellow classmates consider him to be stupid. So Thomas Aquinas had personal experience with anxiety, as do all of us, and his intellect enabled him, and his spirituality, his purity of heart, enabled him to think through the causes and the cure for anxiety. What Thomas Aquinas says in the Prima Secunda, the second part of the first part of the Summa Theologiae, question 38 in particular, is this. Pleasure is what we experience when our desire reposes in suitable goods. And sorrow or anxiety arises when we are assailed with something that is unsuitable to our appetite. We desire pleasure, we experience some kind of pain, and that experience of pain shatters the repose that we otherwise might be experiencing. And we can call that sorrow or anxiety, according to Thomas Aquinas. What we need to overcome sorrow or anxiety when we experience it is a renewal of pleasure, a renewal of reposing in suitable goods, says Thomas. Because pleasure is to sorrow, he says, what repose is to weariness. What the spirit and what the soul needs when it is tired, when it is anxious, is pleasure. What the body needs when it is worn out, when it is weary, is rest, is repose. And Thomas also is astute enough to recognize that there really is a strong connection between the psychological state of anxiety and one's physical well-being. He says that sorrow or anxiety, of all the passions, most harms the body. So he sees this somatic connection when we are in a state of anxiety, which strikes me as just being a sane observation to make. Now, there are several strategies that St. Thomas Aquinas advises to eliminate or at least minimize the effects of anxiety. He says, for example, because anxiety so affects the body, and the body in turn affects the anxiety, well, one of the ways in which we can try to do something about the anxiety is to treat the body. And it has been shown, Thomas Aquinas argues, that warm baths can calm the body and hence calm the anxiety which may be affecting the body. So he recommends baths. He recommends that we get lots of sleep and that we bathe often in order to try and create an equilibrium in the body and in the mind that will minimize our anxiety. He also says something that I think is really quite important. He says anxiety is a state in which we feel as if we are trapped. He says that in question 35 in the Prima Secunda, as a matter of fact. It feels as if we are imprisoned in a situation in which we simply cannot escape. And so it's important, in order to begin to escape from the anxiety, to let one's anxieties out into the open. If one feels the need to cry or lament or to weep, do so. It can release some of the tension that's been built up in the mind and the body because of the anxiety. Tears can help us, in other words, says Thomas Aquinas, minimize the anxiety we might be feeling, because tears serve as a kind of release of the anxiety. There's another strategy for coping with anxiety, and it is sharing it with one's friends and allowing one's friends to sympathize with the anxiety that one's experiencing. And this will help, says Thomas Aquinas, for two reasons. The first is that when our friends commiserate with our anxiety, they share the burden of the anxiety. And in sharing the burden of the anxiety, they lessen its weight upon our own shoulders. I suppose you might say that this could be summarized by the old saying that misery loves company, in the sense that when we are miserable, it is good for people who will share the burden of our misery with us. But there's a second reason why the company of friends who can sympathize with us is so important when it comes to eliminating or minimizing anxiety, and it's this. Friends who will sympathize with us show us that we are loved. Their very fact that they are willing to share our pain with us is an act of love. And when we know that we are loved, we know that we are not alone in the world. We know that we have compatriots who have our backs, as it were. And that can be a great, great comfort to us when we're suffering from anxiety. But there's a final way, and Thomas thinks that it's the best way, which is not to minimize the first three ways that he's talked about. That is, getting lots of sleep and bathing in warm water, making sure that one allows oneself the outlet of tears and external expressions of emotion, keeping in company with friends who will sustain one. All of these are good strategies, but the best strategy of all, because it produces the most pleasure of all, says Thomas Aquinas, is contemplation of the true. Contemplation of divine things, because after all, by analogy, Thomas Aquinas tells us elsewhere, God is the truth, and God is the most perfect exemplification of the true. So in order to somehow rest in a desire which is good, what we need to do is to turn our thoughts to the true, the good, and the beautiful, to contemplate them, to recognize in contemplating them that these anxiety-producing events that are weighing upon us are not the final word, that there is more to the world than the immediate entrapment I might feel at the present time. To allow myself to experience the beauty of a piece of music or the beauty of a poem, to allow myself to experience truth by contemplating not just God, but also the examples of truth that I encounter in the world, to allow myself to appreciate and to embrace the good that can be found in the world, the good of creation, the good of human actions, the good of sensual delights that are appropriate to who I am as a human being, such as the taste of food, the smell of a flower. All of these can help alleviate the anxiety that we feel. So once again, what Thomas has done is to incorporate the body, the mind, and now we see the spirit, to recognize that they are one, that they interact with one another, and that we ought to do in trying to cope with our anxiety is to treat all three of them, to treat the body with sleep and baths, to treat the mind with tears and the affection of friends, and to treat the spirit by focusing upon the good, the true, and the beautiful, the exemplary of which is God himself. Friends, this is Father Carey Walters, hoping that your anxiety during these dark days can be minimized. Please, if you will, wear your mask and continue to socially distance. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe to the Holy Spirit Moments YouTube channel. God bless you. I will see you again soon.